Sony, who are by no means new to the head-mounted display market, announced Project Morpheus earlier this year, a VR headset for eventual release on the PS4. Unlike the Oculus Rift, Morpheus is not publicly available at this time, and there is still no release window. From the way Sony talks about the project, I don't get the impression that they're desperate to beat Oculus to market with a consumer product. Rather, they are taking their time to learn important lessons and signal to the development community, indies and AAA alike, where they see the future of PlayStation going. As they're not readily available, I only recently had a chance to finally try out Project Morpheus at Develop Conference in Brighton in early July. Whilst comparisons to the Oculus Rift DK1 and DK2 are inevitable, they aren't necessarily that fruitful as we're comparing two moving targets. However sleek and consumer-ready the Sony headset looks, it is still very much just a dev kit. It would not surprise me one bit if the final product specs are quite different from that of the headset I demoed. Likewise, the eventual consumer version of the Rift will no doubt bear little physical resemblance to the current dev kits. As such, my impressions of the headset and the demos I was able to try should be taken as just that, impressions, and not any sort of buyer's guide or final judgments on the respective systems. The industrial design of the headset itself is the most immediate impression and also probably the most uncontroversial positive. Morpheus grips onto your crown and locks firmly yet comfortably into place. The lenses and screen essentially just hang down from above, placing no pressure on your face itself. This is a huge improvement on the current Oculus Rift ski goggle design, which gets hot and leaves unsightly marks on your face after extended use. I would also imagine that hygiene is less of an issue with this design, as there is no direct contact with the skin. Now, I only had a very short time with Sony's headset, so I can't speak with confidence about how it feels after an hour or so of continual use, but it certainly feels more suited to longer play sessions. The resolution of the Morpheus screen is noticeably better than that of DK1, with no apparent screen door effect in the demos I tried. Field of view was good and certainly wide enough to feel present in the scene. When playing the Deep, I didn't get the sense that it was quite as wide as on my Rift, but the Sony rep assured me that this was because the demo intentionally had a diving mask outline. A strange choice considering the demo is supposedly showcasing the hardware. The biggest disappointment was the positional tracking, which did not seem as precise or responsive as you might hope. Ducking did not seem to work properly for me. It was unclear as to whether or not this was a hardware or software issue though. There is a common assumption on forums that the PS4 simply won't be able to handle the low latency and high frame rate that VR demands. However, this was not my experience. The Sony rep confirmed that the demos were running on genuine, unmodified PS4s and no extra processing was going on in the bulky breakout box. Both demos, while relatively simple, looked lovely and ran fine on the PlayStation, leaving no doubt in my mind that the PS4 is going to be quite capable of delivering compelling VR experiences, even if they're not at the absolute top end of what is possible. On to software itself. I was able to try two demos for about 10 minutes at a time each. The Deep, which was originally showcased at GDC back in March, and Street Luge, which debuted at this year's E3. Disappointingly, neither of these demos make use of the Move controller, which seems to me to be Sony's competitive advantage at this point in time. The Deep was actually a cut-down version of what has been shown in the past, to achieve a greater throughput at the expo. The focus of the demo was being attacked by a shark from within your rather fragile-seeming diving cage. This was kind of scary, but by no means overwhelming, as compared to some of the more wholesale horror demos that are available for the Rift. That's certainly no bad thing in my opinion, as overly intense scares can be very off-putting if you're not in the right frame of mind. The only piece of direct interaction in the demo is a flare gun, controlled by a DualShock 4. This gives you something to do without turning the experience into any kind of power fantasy. almost everyone tries to shoot the shark, to no effect whatsoever. More disappointingly though, is the fact that the flares don't seem to properly illuminate the detailed underwater environment, which would have been nice to get a better look at. Overall, the Deep is a memorable experience, but not one that I can see being developed beyond its current tech demo state. Street Luge is much more game-like. You lie on your back and find yourself racing down a road, dodging traffic and trying to keep up momentum. The game is entirely steered with your head, and the sense of speed and scale from this perspective is powerful and intense, making it a good fit for VR. Hitting cars makes them flash red and slows you down, but you don't bounce off them, rather pass through them. This is a very strange feeling and does take you out of the experience somewhat, but that is no doubt better for sim sickness than coming to a sudden stop. And it certainly feels off-putting enough to maintain a strong biological urge to not hit things at high speed. I was told that it is possible to pass between the wheels of the larger trucks. Leaning back to look up at their undercarriages is pretty amazing, but it was very difficult to do right without riding into the wheels. There also didn't seem to be any kind of gameplay benefit, a multiplier or a speed boost, or perhaps I just wasn't doing it right. Street Luge reminded me of the indie space jumping game Oculus. Both are recreations of ridiculously fast and dangerous activities that somehow remain remarkably comfortable. This was a simple demo for conference attendees to play in short sessions, so it is forgiving and very quick to pick up. I'm not sure there is any plan to release this as a full game, but there's no reason it couldn't be extended in much the same ways as Oculus. Adding more increasingly over-the-top tracks and complexity could be added by gradually layering on more optional controls to help achieve higher scores, involving jumps and tricks for example. With all eyes on Oculus VR at the moment as DK2s start to ship, it is easy to forget that they are no longer the only game in town. Indeed, with Google, Samsung, as well as several smaller HMD companies also throwing their hats into the ring, it is becoming clear that this is no longer a game for just 2 players. What I saw of Morpheus was very convincing though. I've no doubt that if it was my first exposure to modern VR, I would be just as evangelical about it as I was when I first tried the Rift. Comfort was a big plus point, and performance-wise the Sony demos looked great and ran perfectly well. The software on show itself was no more than a couple of tech demos that will almost certainly not see commercial release. Evidence that Sony are not really in any great rush to get this technology out to consumers, as compared to Oculus, who have been increasingly keen to show off full games for VR. We do know that Sony are taking an active role in evangelising VR to developers, large and small, and already have some commitments from developers to release their Rift games for Project Morpheus, for example Eve Valkyrie. The biggest unique selling point of VR on PlayStation is the standardised motion controllers in the form of Move. It was disappointing not to have a chance to try out a demo that made use of these, but based on what we know this technology can do, combined with a really solid HMD, Sony are poised, if not quite ready, to play a major role in popularising VR. Now our DK2s haven't arrived yet, but hit subscribe to hear our initial thoughts on them as soon as they do decide to show up.